Well, Red Bull continued with the dominance of the RB19 in Melbourne in qualifying. I'll say dominance, continued to be super quick. But the variables came into play in a big way. Slightly colder conditions on Saturday compared with Friday, 1 or 2 degrees cooler, very cold track temperatures as well. And the red tyre, upon which everybody had to qualify, not only took time to get up to temperature, but there also seemed to be some sort of construction thing as well, of getting the construction to work. That came to light in FP3, a lot of teams realizing that they could get 2 or 3 quick laps out of the tyre, which is unusual, providing they did the slow laps in between. And that, of course, created havoc with traffic. And Q1 was always going to be an issue with slower cars getting in the way. And so it proved, with a number of quick runners losing laps because they were coming across the slower cars, or slower cars that were going a bit sideways and doing things and missing braking points and things like that. So it was a messy FP3, just as it had been a messy Friday as well. Not so many reds this time, although there was one when some debris came on the circuit. And then we got to qualifying. There's a lot of traffic out there. But the highlight of Q1, if you like, if you want to call it a highlight, was Sergio Perez continuing to have a horrendous day. He went off 4 times in FP3 and went off virtually at the start of his first run in Q1, just locked up under braking into the right-hander, turn 4, I think, and just went off into the boonies and couldn't get the car stopped, couldn't get it restarted, stuck in the gravel trap. A very ignominious end to the winner of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in what is for sure the best car in Formula One. Now, afterwards, Sergio said there was a problem which we never got to fix. I thought it had been fixed in FP3, which caused the lockup. Not a braking issue, he suggested. It was something to do with the engine and obviously the braking effect of the engine when you come out of the power. But it was interesting, I thought, afterwards to read in fine detail the quote from Red Bull team, which said, we're obviously going to investigate the car, and if there is an issue, we will, of course, put it right. The word if, of course, being the important one there. You could look at this a little bit cynically and say it was a bit of a classic Checo here, coming off a win, coming off a great weekend, coming to Melbourne full of confidence, but doing what he normally does and goes slightly off the boil in terms of concentration, made those mistakes when he couldn't get tyre temperature in FP3, and then did the same at the beginning of qualifying. It's I think, a highlight of the difference between Max and Checo. Let's put this under the heading of, I think the RB19 has been affected more by the tyre temperature problems today than most of the other cars, and that's a simple thing. It's because the RB19 quite typically is quite kind to its tyres. So ergo, if you need to get the tyres to really work, get them energized, it's a bigger job for the Red Bull drivers to do that than, say, the Mercedes or Alpine drivers. And so Checo was in the situation where he had to get tyre temperature, and he's a relatively late braker compared with Max Verstappen, and he also brakes quite hard compared with Max Verstappen. And I think personally that was his undoing, and that is the difference. I think I've said many times Checo's absolutely brilliant with his right foot in terms of the way he gets the power down, particularly out of slow corners, and possibly he still has an edge over Max in that area, and we might well see that at Monaco again. But in terms of braking, Max has got a massive edge over Sergio Perez. We don't talk about that very much, but it's clear, and Max is so good at massaging the brakes when he needs to and getting the car to look pretty boring on the lap. His lap, when he went out and got the pole, in difficult conditions because there wasn't enough time to do the sort of 2-lap warm-up you needed to get the heat cycle correct. It had to be done in 1 lap because of the compressed time of Q3. And to run 2 sets as well, because having a new set was always going to give you a slight edge, and you didn't want to stay out there on the same set. After 3 quick laps, the degradation set in, or the loss of time. Anyway, it wasn't really degradation, but loss of time. We saw a lot of laps on the soft tyre in FP3 this morning, with some teams running fuel load as well, up to 10, 12 laps. Unheard of, really, but anyway. So Max was really good, I thought, at just getting the car at it's his world, isn't it? This linear world. If he comes out of a corner, and if the car is slightly out of skew with the power on, he's just so good at settling the car and accelerating in a straight line. And you very rarely see any of this. He got one of them out of the second last corner where there was a huge amount of understeer going in for everybody. It was just really slippery there. But generally, Max was just using all the road, obviously bouncing over curbs on exit quite a lot, sometimes maybe a little bit too much. But his lap was all about linear placement of the car. And it was a joy to watch. There was a lot of pressure on him today, actually, because the tyre problem, the temperature problem, brought the field to the Red Bulls, and they were there to be beaten, really, potentially, I thought, by the Aston Martin and possibly by Leclerc on a really good lap in the Ferrari, if Ferrari were going to benefit also from this disparity on the tyre temperatures. As it happened, Charles didn't get it together, didn't get a great lap in any of the sessions, and was kind of overshadowed by Carlos Sainz today, who did a very good job, got to say, really good job. And it was Mercedes who took the pole race to Max Verstappen, and it was George Russell, right on the edge. Just one of those George Russell laps, not as linear as Max's, but doesn't matter. This is the way George drives. He's got a few more curves to his driving, but just unbelievable judgment and car control, definitely in the case of George Russell, car control. Whereas Lewis, slightly slower, was driving the max lap, was driving the linear lap and looking well on top of the car. But in terms of that one lap, when the grip was right there, it was George that did it. Anyway, that's a little bit down the road. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to say that I thought Max, given, and Red Bull knew that. They knew how near potentially Aston were going to be and maybe somebody else. It turned out to be Merck, as I say. They knew that, and Max had to go out under a lot of pressure to do that, bearing in mind Checo had already gone off. And underlining, really, I think, how difficult the RB19 potentially was going to be if they didn't get the temperatures absolutely correct. And that was the hallmark of Max's drive, his pole drive today, I thought. And yeah, really, really good pole. When he crossed the line to do that, the first guy under 17, and considerably under 17 as well, you just thought that is a world champion's pole. But then George did the 16.9, and full credit to him for that. Incredible. So yeah, Mercedes. I see it. Yeah, of course everybody's working. Of course they've got some upgrades, and of course they're heading in the right direction. We all have been saying that. You know, there's no way Mercedes is going to languish where they were. They're too big a team, too good a team. And of course this will add to the confusion about where they need to go with the car, because a lot of the Merc people will be saying, well, you know, I told you, this car just needs development. Again, I think Mercedes need to be a little bit careful. It sounds a bit condescending to say that, but I'm pretentious, really. But I'm going to say it anyway. Just as we thought, just as some people thought after Brazil last year, wow, Mercedes have cracked it. That had to be seen in the context of Red Bull having their worst weekend of the year in terms of getting that car to work with ride heights incorrect. And I think this one needs to be seen in the context of this tyre problem bringing the field together. And you could argue that if any car is going to do well in that situation, it's going to be the high downforce Mercedes. I think the difference between this Merc and last year's Merc, though, is top speed. Let's have a look at those, because Mercedes have actually done a very good job of not losing any top speed. In fact, of gaining top speed over the winter with the development they did and the new regs on the car. So Max 3.25 on his pole lap, George Russell 3.22 on his 16.9. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. And Lewis underlining that with a 3.22. And see that in the context of Fernando Alonso 3.18 and Lance Stroll 3.18. And so both drivers confirming what is the top speed of those cars. And there you can see Mercedes pretty racy with that car, assuming they're going to get the tyres to last the same way Max is going to be able to get them to last, and he's going to get the best from them. And we haven't yet seen the Mercedes on the medium. And I should point out here that the only guy who did any running on the medium of any length with fuel in the car was Max Verstappen in FP3, a like 10 or 12 lap run. Everybody else was on softs, either trying to do a quick lap to get qualifying going or to put some fuel in the car and see what they can get out of the soft tyre. But Max alone, I made the point yesterday, he's often fighting against the mainstream in terms of tyre choice in the build-up to the race. There he was doing his homework on the medium tyre, you know, and that is very Red Bull, very Max Verstappen, and it's one of the reasons they're so good. It's quite boring actually for a driver like Max, I think, when everybody else is out there on the soft tyre doing simulations for the qualifying run, or maybe doing a slightly longer run, as I say. But it's quite fun. They're all going quite quickly, and he's doing his homework on the medium tyre, sort of doing a full tank time, 3 seconds off the pace, much slower in a straight line than he'd want to be. But he does it, and he did it really well. And I think that was part of what we saw today, that workaholic side of Max. And then also, that's going to bear fruit in the race, of course, because he does know how the medium tyre is going to work in these cold conditions. The other thing to say about Mercedes is that Lewis, at one point, was P1, and was really good. I mean, that's a great lap, 17.1, you'd think, with Max doing a 16.7. But then there's George again going in and doing that 16.9. And as much as Lewis is the gentleman, and as much as Lewis says, as he often says now, as much as he says, I love the fans, I love coming here, we race as a team, he's having to get used now to saying, and George Russell did a brilliant job, because he did. And this is becoming a little bit of a pattern. But of course, it's qualifying. And in the race, Lewis has got the clean side of the road. That's one thing. He's going in the corner behind Max. He's got George to the right. And let's see what happens in that first turn one. If he's alongside George, and George is on the inside, George is going to probably brake as late as he can and make Lewis force the issue. Lewis will be on the racing line, of course. So good luck, Toto, is all I can say with that one. And then came Fernando in the Aston Martin, the car that many thought would be there, as I say, to take the pole race to Max Verstappen. Did Fernando underperform slightly as he did in Bahrain in terms of that qualifying lap? 17.1, Lance Stroll 17.3. You'd think that he might be a little bit quicker than that, might have done a 16.9. Probably you'd think he might be on the front row, but where he is, he's not going to be too upset about that. And we know how good Fernando is in the race anyway. So that'll be his mindset. Yeah, okay, we're there or thereabouts, and that's better than Aston Martin have ever been, and we're in great shape for the race. But look at the top speeds, 3.18 for Fernando, as I say, and Lance Stroll 3.18, confirming that. So there's quite a big, significant difference, consistent difference in top speed between the Mercedes and the Aston Martin, and obviously then between Red Bull and the Aston Martin. And that is, as much as Fernando will be talking about that in the race, we do have 3 DRS zones, as has to be said. And but the third DRS is on that quick section around the back. And it's not a great place. It's not a standard DRS zone. There's corners there, there's a curve, and it's going to be difficult to do anything there in terms of overtaking. It'll just bunch the cars together as they're coming into the tighter last part of Sector 3. And we saw a bit of an incident in this DRS zone in the Formula 3 race, and I mentioned this because it might have a bearing on some of what we might see tomorrow, because it was between Juan Pablo Montoya's son, Sebastian, having his third Formula 3 race, still very young and inexperienced, but driving well from the pole in the sprint race, and the reverse grid one, and his teammate at High Tech, Luke Browning, who's more experienced and very quick, catching him with the DRS in this Sector 3. And Sebastian, there's a left kink, and he sort of goes into the left kink. But Browning is catching him so quickly with the DRS that he has no option when Sebastian starts to turn in to go way up on the curb. And he does one of these, and the car goes up, and luckily comes down again. Because it's pretty high speed, even in Formula 3. So, this business of putting in that DRS zone in that area, I've got my doubts about it, to be honest. But anyway, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Formula 1 car's very different. Maybe it's better or worse, I don't know, in that context. But we've got that DRS zone, so we'll see what happens. But and that may well, the point I'm making is, I guess, if you're going to be slightly slower in top speed, at least Melbourne has got 3 DRS zones now for Fernando to enjoy and to use. And potentially that Aston Martin is going to be a better chassis over a race distance in terms of looking after its tyres than the Mercedes. And so I guess quite a few people are thinking Fernando might finish ahead of the Mercs by the end of the day. We'll see. It'll be an interesting battle. As I say, there's a battle also between Lewis and George, and that one is going to be well worth watching. Let's have a look at Charles Leclerc. Yeah, I mean, the Ferrari's 3.21 and Carlos Sainz 3.19. I think that's, let's take an average of 3.20 there. So they're quicker than the Aston Martins, but not quite as quick as the Mercedes in a straight line. And it's a long time since we've been able to say that. But here we are, race 3, 2023. The Mercedes at Albon Park is quicker in a straight line than the Ferrari. And the Ferrari over the lap, about the same as the Mercedes. So Mercedes, as I say, they've got a lot of thinking and planning to do, because if they do decide still to go down the route of a completely new car, they will be thinking, well, we're riding off 23 and we're doing that so we can learn about this car and develop it for 2024. That's the way they've got to think because of the budget cap. Equally, they could think, this car is okay, there's a lot of life in it, and we've chosen that path and we're going to go for it. And look at Brazil, look at Melbourne, and if they do that, they've got more potential scope for development, obviously, because they won't be eating the budget cap as much. So a lot of decision making there at Mercedes. They may well have made the decision already. A lot of people think they have, but things like Melbourne will make them think again, that is for sure. And so going into the race, you got Max obviously looking for a clean start, and in theory will pull gradually away, looking after his tyres, getting him up to temperature at the right rate. And then you've got all sorts of stuff going on. You've got George v. Lewis, you've got Fernando, you've got Lance Stroll wanting to be part of the party. You've got Carlos Sainz in there, you've got Charles Leclerc, a bit annoyed that he didn't qualify better. And you've got potentially Esteban Ocon coming up as well. So lots to look forward to tomorrow at Albert Park. Capacity crowd cheering on Oscar Piastri, who didn't get out of Q1, but nonetheless is the star driver this weekend for the locals. And as I say yesterday, those that saw him in the wet won't forget that either. So that was it for Saturday. Another video coming up after the race tomorrow. See you then.